Hey guys, welcome to our first 2023 college football bowl predictions video. So there's about 40 to 41 total bowl games for this season, so I'm not going to make a 3 to 4 hour long video and then force you guys to have to listen to that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break it up into 4 separate videos. The first one being today, where we will be looking at the December 16 bowls through the Saturday, December 22nd bowl game. So the very first 11 bowl games of the 2023 bowl season. We'll be looking at who we think is going to win, who we think is going to lose, and what we also predict the final scores will be. And that very last bowl video that we make, those will be those January 1st bowls and also that first round of the playoffs. But let's get things started. Hit that like button and subscribe. The very first game of the 2023 college football bowl season is at 11 a.m. this coming Saturday. We have 6-6 Georgia Southern versus 9-3 Ohio. Not the Buckeyes, but the Bobcats, and Georgia Southern is 3.5-point favorites here. And this is actually going to be the Myrtle Beach Bowl, and it's going to be in Conway, South Carolina at Brooks Stadium. So, like we said, Georgia Southern is 3.5-point favorites here. When you're looking at these two teams, Georgia Southern is obviously the favorite right now because they actually have a pretty efficient offense. They were a really good team for the first half of the season, and then they went on a 4-game losing streak. They do have Clay Helton as the head coach. Clay Helton is the old USC coach. He was fired, and he's now at Georgia Southern. They played a pretty high-ranked FBS team at the beginning of this year. They were pretty good back then, but they got curb stomped, and they've basically been spiraling down from there. But when you're looking at the total team stats here, so looking at Georgia Southern, they do come in, they average 30.9 points per game. Like I said, they have a very efficient, high-scoring offense. And Ohio, they average a very low 22.9 points per game. So obviously Georgia Southern has the edge on offense, but when you're looking at the defensive side of the ball, it's completely the other way. So Georgia Southern has a horrible defense. They give up 29.6 points per game, whereas the Bobcats, they actually average 15.4 points per game on defense. So the defense here always travels. It definitely travels during bowl season. When you're looking at the quarterback matchup, you have Davis Brin here for Georgia Southern. He's closing in on 3,500 yards. He has 22 touchdowns, but he also has 16 picks. So you have a quarterback who's prone to throwing just as many interceptions as touchdowns, playing what is actually statistically a top 15 defense. That definitely favors the Bobcats here. And the Bobcats quarterback, they're coming in here. They have Curtis Rourke. He's closing in on 2,300 yards. And they have Bangura at running. So all of these things added together, I have the Bobcats getting the win here based mainly off of the defensive issues. Like I said, defense travels. That will be there during the bowl game. Georgia Southern's defense is so bad that the Bobcats will have opportunities to score, and their defense is so good that they should be able to control Georgia Southern's offense, and they're probably going to get a couple turnovers. So I'm going to go with that plus 3.5, and I have the Bobcats getting the win here, 27-24. The next game that we'll be looking at 2:15 on ESPN, we have 8-4 Jacksonville State versus 6-6 Louisiana Ragin' Cajuns. This is the RNL Carriers New Orleans Bowl. Jacksonville State is 3.5-point favorites here. So with Jacksonville State, welcome to the FBS. This was actually their first year in the group of 5. So they finally made it to the FBS up from the FCS, and they're 8-4. So they met their doubters, and they're actually having a really good season so far. Who's their coach? Rich Rodriguez. Yes, that Rich Rodriguez. So the guy who was the head coach at West Virginia, then Michigan, and where was he at after that? I think he was at Arizona. Was he there? Arizona or Arizona State? I think it was Arizona, though. And then now he is at Jacksonville State. They have a pretty good offense, and they have a pretty decent defense, and they will be playing the Ragin' Cajuns here. So Jacksonville State trying to get the 9 wins. When you're looking at the total team stats here, so Jacksonville State averages a very respectable 29.8 points per game, but the Ragin' Cajuns, they come in, they average 32.3 points per game, so they also have a pretty good offense. On defense, that's where the difference lies. Jacksonville State, they give up 20.3 points per game, and the Ragin' Cajuns have a horrible defense, giving up 28.2 points per game. So like I said, that's where the difference lies. Defense does travel. Jacksonville State does have the better running back. They have Malik Jackson closing in on 900 yards right now. So I think Jacksonville State will be able to run the ball on the Ragin' Cajuns. They will be able to control the game. I do have them getting their 9th win first year in the FBS. I have them winning 31-28. So they won't cover that 3.5 point spread, but they will get to 9 wins, and that's a pretty big deal. So props to Rich Rod and to Jacksonville State for doing so well their first season in the FBS. The next game that we'll be looking at is at 3:30 p.m. on ABC. We have 11-2 Miami of Ohio versus 8-5 Appalachian State. This is the Avocados from Mexico Cure Bowl. Appalachian State is 5.5 point favorites here. So this is another really good game because this is two teams that are basically going in two different directions. Miami of Ohio is a extremely talented defensive team. They have 2 losses. One of those losses was to the University of Miami at the very beginning of the year, and their defense did play pretty well that game. They lost. They got beat up, but they played really good versus a talented FBS team and a Power 5 team. Now, Appalachian State, they did make their conference championships this past weekend. They did lose, but nonetheless, they have a very talented offensive team. When you're looking at the team stats here, so Appalachian State comes in, they average 34.8 points per game. Like I said, they have a very talented offensive side of the ball. When you look at Miami, they average 26.9 points per game. But again, the difference is on defense. So Miami only gives up 16.2 points per game. They have a top 20 defense, and they definitely have a run-stopping defense. So it will be very hard to run on them. Appalachian State gives up 28.4 points per game. So there's definitely going to be opportunities for Miami to be able to score and be able to get touchdowns and field goals here. Looking at the quarterback play, Appalachian State comes in. They have Joey Aguilar. He's having a great year so far, closing in on 3,600 yards as of right now. So this is a team that can go vertical. Their defense has a lot of holes. They will give up points, but he's looking to get over 33 touchdowns. Right now, like I said, 3,600 yards, 33 touchdowns, 9 picks. This team can score. They can score in bunches. This could potentially be a shootout because their defense is so bad. But I have Appalachian State here getting the win, 27-24. So not covering the spread, but getting the win. Next game at 5:45 on ESPN, we have 10-4 New Mexico State versus 8-4 Fresno State. This is the Isleta New Mexico Bowl. New Mexico State is 3.5 point favorites here. So with New Mexico, this is the same New Mexico that went to Auburn and completely curb stomped them at home. They got paid $1.8 million, went to Auburn, beat the crap out of them like 38-10, and then went back home with that big paycheck. So props to them. They're having a really good year here, and they are actually looking for their 11th win of the season. Really strong season for them so far. Fresno State, they're also having a pretty good season, but their coach, Jeff Tedford, is going to actually be missing this game. That's a massive loss. They will be without their leader, but New Mexico State's quarterback, Diego Pavia, might actually not be playing this game also. So one team doesn't have their coach, one team doesn't have their quarterback, and Pavia for New Mexico was closing in on 3,000 yards. He was having a very strong season. The good thing for New Mexico, they're a very balanced team, so they run just as much as they pass the ball. So perhaps the running game might be able to pick up the slack there, and they might be going for a 60-40 run differential. Looking at the team stats here, New Mexico, they average 28.7 points per game. Fresno State averages 29.9 points per game, and New Mexico gives up 21.8 points per game, and Fresno State gives up 24.6 points per game. The quarterback for Fresno State is Mickey Keene. He is closing in on 2,600 yards, and Pavia closing in on 3,000 yards. Both teams have pretty decent run games, very deep rushing rooms. I have New Mexico getting the win. This is the New Mexico team that beat Auburn. They can beat Power 5 teams. Fresno State, they're not a pushover, but their defense will not be enough to shut out New Mexico State. I have New Mexico State getting the win here, cruising to an easy win, 28-20, and also covering that spread. The next game that we'll be looking at is at 7:30 p.m. on ABC. We have 7-5, the UCLA Bruins versus 8-5, Boise State. This is the Starco Brands LA Bowl. The Bruins are 3.5 point favorites here. looking at these two teams. So with the Bruins, obviously they've had a lot of changes. So Dante Moore did hit the transfer portal. He is still currently in the portal as of right now. And their defensive coordinator, Deontay Lynn, is now the defensive coordinator for USC. So he has left the program. The Bruins' main thing to fame this year was they had a really solid defense. The coordinator is now gone. Other guys will probably pick up the slack. They still have Chip Kelly, so they still have their main leader there, but that is a big loss. Now, Dante Moore wasn't the starting quarterback. They were going with Ethan Garbers, technically, but they were kind of playing quarterback carousel, so they had one guy starting, one guy not starting. It was a complete disaster. But like I said, their defense was what was carrying them so far this season, but that guy is now gone. For the Boise State Broncos, they had a horrible start to the season. They fired their coach, but they did just promote Spencer Danielson as the head coach permanently going forward. He did sign a contract there. They finished out the season as strong as anyone, had a great end to the season, won their conference championship last week. This is a team that can score, and they can play pretty solid defense as well. Looking at the team stats here. So the Bruins average 25.8 points per game. Boise State averages 32.9 points per game. And on defense, the Bruins with a really strong defensive front, they only give up 18.1 points per game, and Boise State gives up 24.8 points per game. But Boise State did have a very strong second half of the season, whereas the Bruins went the other way. They were in the top 25, had a horrible end to the season, fell out of the top 25. Due to all these things, Boise State's quarterback Green also hit the transfer portal. He's gone. I actually think he's going to Arkansas now. I don't think it matters. Boise State has been one of the better run programs of the last 25 years, actually. That might sound funny to some people, but if you've been keeping up with college football since 2004, you know that it's true. I have Boise State getting the win here, 30-24. So I'm going to go with that plus 3.5. I'm going with the upset, Boise over the Bruins. The Bruins they have no offense, and they don't know where they're going on offense either. The next game that we'll be looking at is a late one, 9:15 p.m. on ESPN. We have Cal at 6-6 versus Texas Tech at 6-6. This is the Radiance Technologies Independence Bowl. Texas Tech 2.5-point favorites here. So Cal, they had some really close games this year. They did play some teams really tough. They did play Washington pretty tough. They can run the ball. They give up points, but they have been known to score in some games and then stink in some games. So you just really don't know which Cal team is going to show up, but they have the ability to score with a lot of other teams blow for blow. Texas Tech, this is a team that highly underachieved this year. They are way better than their record. They almost beat Oregon in Texas Tech. They are a tough team, a strong team. Their main thing they have is they have Tajay Brooks at running back, closing in on 1,500 yards and 9 touchdowns. So Texas Tech will be looking basically to run the ball right down Cal's throats. Looking at the total team stats here. So you have Cal coming in. They average a whopping 31.6 points per game. Texas Tech 26.8 points per game. And both teams have horrible defenses. So Cal gives up 32.7 points per game. Texas Tech gives up 27.0 points per game. So basically this game is a who's going to stink the least on the defensive side of the ball. Both teams do not have good defenses, but one team does have a pretty good offense, and that's Cal. So I'm actually going to go with the plus 2.5. I have Cal getting the win here, 34-30, and getting the upset. So that ends that Saturday slate. We're now moving on to Monday, December 18th at 2:30 p.m. on ESPN. 7-5 Western Kentucky, which kind of underachieved this year, versus 6-6 Old Dominion. This is the famous Toastery Bowl. Old Dominion is 2.5-point favorites here. Western Kentucky, they have a pretty efficient offense. They basically run an air raid system there. They have Austin Reed at quarterback. For some reason, it seems like this guy's been playing for 10 years, basically. But he lights it up. He has lit it up his whole career. Looking at the team stats here. So Western Kentucky comes in. They're averaging 29.8 points per game. Old Dominion averages 22.9 points per game. And on defense, Western Kentucky gives up 28.2 points per game, and Old Dominion gives up 26.3 points per game. So when you're looking at the team stats here, you're probably wondering, why is Old Dominion the favorite? They have a worse offense. They have a pretty on par defense with Western Kentucky. They both don't have good defenses. Well, I honestly don't know why they're the favorite in this game. So I do think Western Kentucky is a better team. They did play the Buckeyes somewhat close for the first portion of that game. They have Austin Reed at quarterback. That should be the difference maker to me. I think that Western Kentucky is going to get the win here. So again, I am going with the upset. I have Western Kentucky winning 37-27. So I'm going with that plus 2.5. I just think that Austin Reed should make the difference here. And they also have Corley at wide receiver closing in on 1,000 yards. The next game is moving on to Tuesday, December 19th at 9 p.m. on ESPN. We have UTSA sitting at 8-4 versus Marshall at 6-6. This is the Scooters Coffee Frisco Bowl. UTSA is a whopping favorite here, 9.5-point favorites here. Now, Taylor, the head coach for UTSA, he was getting a lot of rumors that he was going to be the head coach of the Aggies. He did end up staying with them. That's a massive loss to be able to keep Traylor there as the head coach. That's a big gain for them. They didn't have a very strong season so far this year. They are in search of their 9th win. They have a lot of playmakers. So looking at the total team stats here, you have UTSA, they average 31.7 points per game, and Marshall averages 23.3 points per game. And on defense, UTSA gives up 24.7 points per game, and Marshall gives up 28.2 points per game. Looking at the playmakers here, you have the quarterback Harris for UTSA, closing in on 2,600 yards, 18 touchdowns, 8 picks, and Francher for Marshall, closing in on 2,200 yards. He has 11 touchdowns and 11 picks. I have UTSA cruising to an easy win here. They are the very heavy favorites. I have them winning 30-20 and also covering that spread as well. The next game that we'll be looking at is Thursday, December 21st at 8 p.m. on ESPN. 6-6 South Florida Bulls versus the 6-6 Syracuse. This is the roofclaim.com Boca Raton Bowl. I don't know where they come up with these bowl games, these names down here in these lower bowls, but they get pretty creative and pretty crazy sometimes. But USF, I didn't even know that they were bowl eligible, so mad props to them for this season. They did play Bama really close at, was that week 3 or 4 of the season? So USF comes in, they average 30.8 points per game. They have a pretty good offense, and Syracuse comes in, they average 25.5 points per game. And on defense, USF gives up 34.9 points per game. That is a god-awful, horrible defense. They're definitely going to give up some points. Syracuse gives up 23.8 points per game. So Syracuse, while they're not good, they are the more balanced team. They have Schrader at quarterback, closing in on 1,700 yards, 13 touchdowns, and 6 picks. But the quarterback edge does go to USF. They have Brown at quarterback, closing in on 3,100 yards, 23 touchdowns, and 11 picks. What Syracuse has going for them is they obviously come from the Power 5, and their defense is not bad. Now, Syracuse is that team that always starts out 5-0, and then they train wreck the second half. That's what happened this season, so it is what it is. They don't have a bad offense, but it's definitely not good, and it's technically below average, but they have the better defense. So I'm going to go with Syracuse getting a win in a shootout, 34-28, and covering the spread. And the final game that we'll be looking at today, Friday, December 22nd, 6:30 p.m. on ESPN. We have 6-6 Georgia Tech versus 6-6 UCF. This is the Union Home Mortgage Gasparilla Bowl. UCF is 4.5-point favorites here. These teams have the same record, 6-6. Georgia Tech had some pretty good wins so far this year. They had some big upset wins. They had some crappy losses, like when they got curb stomped by Bowling Green. But their very last game of the season, they barely lost to Georgia. That was a one-possession game. Georgia did have a lot of players out. But props to Georgia Tech for even keeping the game that close. Looking at UCF, this team is a lot better than their record shows. They were without Plumlee for the majority of the season, and they still were bowl eligible. He's a pretty decent quarterback. He can run, he can throw. Like I'm saying, they're just way better than their record. So do not judge them by that 6-6 record. The team stats here, Georgia Tech, very good offense. They averaged 31.2 points per game. UCF, they averaged 32.5 points per game. And they also did beat the brakes off of Oklahoma State at the very end of the season. So they can beat good teams. They can run on them. That's their main thing, and we'll get to that in just a point. But Georgia Tech on defense, they give up 30.5 points per game. UCF gives up 25.4 points per game. So UCF, first year in the Big 12, without their quarterback, still got to 6-6. They do have Plumlee. He can run it, he can throw it, but the difference maker is R.G. Harvey at running back, closing in on 1,300 yards. Look for Gus Malzahn to just give them a steady dose of run the ball right down their throat. I have UCF getting the win here. 31-28. Georgia Tech does have a good defense, so they will be able to score, but I have the Golden Knights getting the win, not covering, but winning and getting 7 wins first year in the Big 12. So that's my breakdown of our part 1 of the bowl games from the 12th to the 22nd. Hit that like button and subscribe. And if you have any thoughts, drop it in the comments below and I will make sure to respond. Thank you.